Black object. This is the first time I've ever tried to write this down, and the first time I'm sharing it with anyone outside my family. I'm leaving out specific details like the time and location because, honestly, I'm still scared of what might happen if this becomes public. It was the summer before 8th grade. 2 of my friends and I decided to sneak out around midnight to wander the neighborhood and visit some girls who lived on the next block. They were having a sleepover, and we thought it'd be fun to stop by. We turned a corner in our neighborhood, and that's when we saw it. In the sky, there was this massive black blimp-like object. Huge, silent, and unlike anything I'd ever seen. It looked like a larger version of the Hindenburg, but the size was staggering, easily 4 or 5 football fields across. No exaggeration, even though I was young at the time. It was incredibly close, hovering silently. Its surface a sleek, polished black like gunmetal. The 3 of us stood there frozen, staring at it, asking each other over and over, "Do you see that? Are you seeing this too?" Each time we all agreed we did. The craft didn't make a sound. No hum, no mechanical noise, nothing. Just this enormous, ominous presence hovering above us. And then time jumped. The next thing I remember, the massive ship was gone. In its place, there was a small, glowing white object in the sky. It looked like a tiny barbell, slowly falling to the ground, with wisps of smoke trailing behind it. That's when 2 brand new black trucks, sleek and shiny with silver gearboxes in the back, like F-150s or S-10s, but nicer, came speeding down the street. After that, I remember walking back to one of my friends' houses. It was early morning by then, around 5 or 6 a.m., and the sun was starting to come up. We promised each other we'd tell my dad about it in the morning because he worked for the city, but we never did. One of those friends drifted out of my life, and I don't know what happened to him. The other was my best friend, but we made this unspoken pact never to talk about it. We stayed close for a while, but there was always something between us we couldn't address. Even years later, when we reconnected on Facebook, that subject remained untouched. Looking back, there's no way we were the only ones who saw it. It wasn't that late at night, and this happened over a heavily populated suburban area of a major city. There had to be other witnesses, people who noticed this massive object hovering silently above their homes. But there was nothing. No news reports, no articles, no whispers in the neighborhood. What scares me more than any abduction scenario is the idea that other people saw it too, and we're all voluntarily suffering from some kind of collective amnesia. Except, we're not. We remember, but we've chosen silence for reasons we don't fully understand. I've thought about hypnosis to try and uncover more, but the idea scares me. I was just a kid, and I don't know if I could trust the process or the hypnotist. But what I do know is this. There's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. It was enormous, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. This is a true story. I'm probably older than most people reading this, and I know what creepypasta is. This isn't that. This happened, and there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. Thanks for letting me get this off my chest. Whew. The roof. My mom has a story she's told me a few times, and it's always stuck with me. It's about her and her friend. Let's call her Lisa. When they were teenagers, they were sitting on the roof of Lisa's house one evening. They noticed a bright light in the sky, which seemed strange, but not immediately alarming. Then, suddenly, the light disappeared. The weirdest part? They thought they'd been on the roof for about 15 minutes, but when they climbed down, they realized that 3 hours had passed. My mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time. When she tried to talk to Lisa about it, Lisa would always shut her down, saying things like, I don't know, or just drop it. Mom eventually stopped bringing it up. A few months later, Mom moved away, and they lost contact for about 10 years. When they finally reconnected, Mom immediately noticed something different about Lisa. She seemed distant and had this dreamy, almost serene demeanor, like she was inexplicably at peace. After catching up for a while, Lisa brought up the incident on the roof. Mom admitted that she still didn't remember anything about it, but Lisa did. She remembered everything. At first, Lisa explained, her memories of the incident were fragmented and confusing, which is why she'd avoided talking about it for so long. Over time, though, the pieces started coming together, and now she remembered everything clearly. Not just that night, but 3 more times she'd been abducted after that. Lisa said that during the first abduction, she was paralyzed and subjected to invasive experiments. It was terrifying. But by the most recent abduction, things had changed. They didn't perform experiments on her anymore. Instead, they communicated with her, not in English or any human language, but somehow she could understand them perfectly, even though she couldn't speak their language in return. According to Lisa, they told her incredible things about space, about Earth, and about herself. They also made a shocking prediction. They told her she would get pregnant in a specific year, but that the pregnancy would end in a stillbirth. They said she would never be able to have children again. Heartbreakingly, Lisa confirmed that their prediction came true. She said they even tried to prevent it from happening but were unsuccessful. Lisa also revealed that they told her my mom had been abducted as well, more than once. Mom was stunned because she had no recollection of any other incidents. However, she admitted that she has had recurring nightmares about being abducted for years, though she's almost sure they're just dreams. Lisa said that with each encounter, she began to understand the truth more and more. When my mom asked her what the truth was, Lisa simply replied, "You'll know eventually." She added that once she fully understood it, everything became wonderful. Over the years, Mom has seen Lisa a few more times. Lisa seems to live a normal life. She's not obsessed with aliens or the paranormal. She only brings up her experiences in passing, as if it's just one part of her story, not the center of it. Lost my car. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here's what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It's about a 2-hour drive, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I was on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I always take home when I notice flashing lights behind me. My first thought was, great, I'm getting pulled over. I turned onto a country road about a quarter mile from where I first saw the lights and brought the car to a stop. As I reached for my glove box to grab my registration and proof of insurance, the flashing lights just disappeared. No car passed me, no sirens, nothing. And that's when things got weird. The electronics in my car started going haywire. The radio began changing stations randomly. The volume rose and fell erratically, and the dome light and headlights started flickering on and off. This was at 10:56 p.m. I figured my battery was failing, or maybe there was a short in the electrical system. I leaned down to pop the hood to check the battery, and that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I knew, I was lying on my back, staring up at the night sky. The stars were incredibly bright, the brightest I'd ever seen. It was cold, and I could feel the chill through my clothes. When I sat up, I realized I was in the middle of a harvested cornfield, surrounded by stalks left over from the recent harvest. I started to panic. Where am I? Why am I in a field? Where the hell is my car? I stood up and looked around, and in the distance, I could see headlights from a road about half a mile away. I started walking toward them. When I got to the intersection, I saw the signs. 350 N and 50 Bellevue. I was half a mile from where I'd parked my car, which was just off the main road. I walked toward the headlights on the main road, trying to piece together what had happened. It couldn't have taken me more than 10 or 15 minutes to get there. But when I reached my car, everything was dark. The battery was completely dead. That struck me as odd. I couldn't have been gone that long. Then I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat. The time read 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned onto the side road to pull over. I sat in my car, completely stunned, trying to process what had happened. Where had those hours gone? How did I end up half a mile away in a cornfield? After sitting there in silence for about half an hour, I remembered that my battery was dead. I called AAA to get a jump. Since I was far from the nearest town, it took them about an hour to get to me. The entire time, I just sat there, replaying the night in my head, searching for some kind of explanation. To this day, I can't think of one. I've only ever shared this story with one person, my uncle. I know that if I told anyone else, they'd either think I was crazy or accuse me of making it all up. And honestly, I can't blame them. If someone told me a story like this, one that so closely resembles every stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. But it happened, and I still don't know why or how. The Man in Black. This isn't my story. It's my dad's. Because it's not my first-hand experience, I can't swear by the "I know what I saw" mantra. But I can tell you this. I believe him. He's never given me a reason to doubt him. And he's not the kind of person to make things up for attention or fun. My dad has over a dozen strange stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a wooded area, and apparently UFO activity was high back then. Whether it was just around their house or the whole area, I'm not sure. My dad and my grandpa would sit on the porch at night and watch strange lights fly around the sky for fun. This was a long time ago, back when my dad was a kid. He's in his 60s now. They'd watch stars dart around like laser lights, laughing about it like it was no big deal. That blows my mind because I've only ever seen anything like that once or twice, and it freaked me out. Besides the lights, my dad experienced a lot of other strange stuff. He's told me stories about isolated earthquakes that no one else felt. In Illinois, of all places. Glowing orbs floating in the sky, and sometimes even following him around. But one story has always stuck with me as the weirdest of them all. The visit. When my dad was about 15, he was outside in his driveway doing whatever teenagers do when they live in a rural, woodsy area. His parents weren't home. They were out shopping or at work. Suddenly, a large black car pulled into the driveway. It was completely silent. No engine sound, no crunching gravel. Just this sleek black car with tinted windows. My dad stood there, watching it, not sure what to think. This was the 1970s, in a rural area, and people were a lot more trusting back then. Leaving your doors unlocked wasn't unusual, so my dad wasn't immediately alarmed. The car door opened, and out stepped a tall, blonde-haired man in an immaculate black suit and sunglasses. My dad noticed right away that something was off about him. He looked too perfect. His skin was flawless, his smile was unnervingly childlike, and his entire appearance seemed too clean, too polished. He was also overdressed for a hot summer day. The man walked up to my dad and asked for his name. My dad, understandably wary, asked him why he wanted to know. The man smiled and said he just wanted to ask a few questions, insisting he meant no harm. My dad, still a little cautious, agreed. The man's tone was friendly and non-threatening, and he seemed almost giddy, like he was excited to be having this conversation. His smile never faltered, and his overly enthusiastic demeanor started to put my dad at ease, even though the whole situation felt odd. The man asked if my dad lived there. My dad said yes, and asked again why he was asking these questions. The man, still grinning, asked if my dad had seen, felt, or heard anything out of the ordinary. My dad answered, sometimes, and asked what this was all about. Before my dad could get another word out, the man's entire demeanor changed. His grin disappeared and he suddenly looked worried. Without another word, he turned around, got back into his car, and drove away. The car made no noise as it left, just as silent as when it arrived. A couple of minutes later, my dad's parents came home. and that was the end of it. The bookstore. Here's where it gets even weirder. About 30 years later, my mom saw the same guy. She was in a bookstore, browsing for something to read, when she turned around and noticed a tall, fair-haired man in a black suit sitting at a table in the cafe area. He was reading a newspaper, and across from him sat another man, dressed exactly the same. Black suit, sunglasses, the works. The two of them stood out immediately. They looked too perfect, too clean, and distinctly out of place. My mom had heard my dad's story before, and as soon as she saw the man, she recognized the description. She stood there for a moment, trying to process what she was seeing. That's when the blonde man noticed her looking at him. His expression changed completely, just like my dad described. He quickly stood up, turned around, and left the bookstore, the second man following close behind. What the hell? I don't know what to make of it. It's like the Men in Black sent their most obvious, awkward agent to study my dad, or maybe the world's worst undercover alien is stalking my family. I've always tried to push this story out of my head because it creeps me out. I'm 22 now, and I can't help but wonder if I'm going to run into this strange blonde stalker at some point. My dad has more stories like this, and I think I'm going to ask him about them again tonight. Maybe I'll get some more details. For now, though, I'm left wondering what the hell is going on. UFO sightings. The first time I ever saw something unexplainable, I was 7 years old in Houston, Texas. I used to climb onto the roof of my mom's Suburban, parked in the driveway, and stare at the stars. One night, I noticed an intensely bright floating light over the tree line, about half a mile away. I yelled for someone to come see it, but no one came. That was the last time I saw anything unusual, until March of 2008. This next experience happened in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, sometime between March 10th and 15th, though I can't pinpoint the exact date. I was so shaken that I stayed up for 4 days trying to make sense of it. At the time, my mom lived in a garden home community. All the houses were identical, single-story buildings, and the open layout gave a great view of the horizon. At exactly 4 a.m., I stepped out of my friend's house into a bright, starry night. As I looked around, something caught my eye to the left. A flashing, strobing light. It shimmered in bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, and orange as it moved silently across the sky. I stood there, transfixed, afraid to go inside to grab anyone because I didn't want to miss a second of it. As the object passed in front of the moon, I saw its outline clearly. It was shaped like a teardrop or sunflower seed, with lights emanating from the top half. It looked like the lights were being transmitted upward in some sort of pattern. A dark, thin line of exhaust trailed behind it, vanishing about 50-75 feet back. The craft was no more than 400 yards away. Once it disappeared past the moon, I ran inside to grab someone. My friend came out and saw it, but by then, it was too far away to make out any details. I headed home, just a few blocks away, and stood in my driveway, staring in the direction the first craft had come from. I noticed 2 dim white lights slowly rising over the horizon, moving toward me at a deliberate pace. I ran inside and woke my mom. We both stood in the driveway for about 20 minutes, watching as 5 separate crafts flew overhead. The crafts came in waves, 2 at a time, then 2 more, then 1 alone. They moved at about no more than 200 feet above us, and were completely silent. Each craft had 2 enormous, bright white lights, roughly 30-40 feet across. Between the white lights was a pulsating red light that dimmed and brightened rhythmically. Based on the size of the lights, I estimated the crafts to be about 150-200 feet wide. The last craft flew lower and slower than the others, and then it made a sound. To this day, I can still hear it in my head. The craft emitted the sound twice, as though it were acknowledging us. I'm convinced it was. The noise was so loud and overwhelming that I started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or what it meant. A couple of weeks later, I was standing in my driveway around 2 a.m., smoking a cigarette and listening to my iPod. I paused the music, waved my hand over the iPod's backlight to create a strobe effect, and suddenly felt like I was being watched. I looked up and saw a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges directly above me, no more than 75 feet up. Its outline pulsed with a dark red and black glow, almost like flowing electricity. It hovered completely silently, shifting side to side and front to back in smooth, controlled motions. It was mesmerizing, and I couldn't move. After 10-15 seconds, I waved at it. In response, the light pattern changed, and it slowly hovered away behind my house. Looking back, I think it wanted me to follow it, but I was too stunned to do anything. I saw that same craft 3 more times. Once in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. In Hoover, I was with friends at an apartment complex on a hill overlooking the city. I saw a gray craft hovering in the distance, facing my direction. As soon as I noticed it, it silently shot off to the right at incredible speed. Another night in Tuscaloosa, I heard a sound like static mixed with a jet engine. I looked up and saw a bright blue slit in the sky, about 200 yards long, hovering vertically over Shelton State Community College. White electric currents rippled along its edges. Then, about 25 white objects shot out of the slit one by one, leaving colorful trails behind them. Afterward, the slit closed from the bottom up, made a strange noise, and disappeared. Once, I woke up from a strange dream in which I felt myself lying on something cold, with a rubbery sensation between my legs. The next morning, I let the dog out and noticed a solid white ring in the grass, about 8-10 feet wide, just off the patio. My mom said she had heard a strange noise that woke her up during the night, but didn't think much of it at the time. I've also seen countless orbs, some floating steadily across the sky, others intensifying in brightness before fading out. I frequently notice streaks as well, low, slow-moving objects with colorful tails. After that first big experience in 2008, I started researching everything I could. I learned about contactees, people who aren't just abducted but are somehow kept up with over time. I can't say for sure why I've had so many experiences, but I think acknowledging these crafts might have made me a target for observation. It feels like both a gift and a curse. I've considered hypnotherapy to uncover more, but I'm not sure I'm ready for what I might find.